The collapse of hierarchy. Something else is happening too, a revolutionary shift in power relationships. Not only are large organisations forced both to change their internal structure and to create temporary units, but they are also finding it increasingly difficult to maintain their traditional chains of command. It would be Pollyanna-ish to suggest that workers in industry or government today truly participate in the management of their enterprises, either in capitalist or, for that matter, in socialist and communist countries. Yet there is evidence that bureaucratic hierarchies, separating those who make decisions from those who merely carry them out, are being altered, sidestepped, or broken. This process is noticeable in industry where, according to Professor William H. Reed of the Graduate School of Business at McGill University, irresistible pressures are battering hierarchical arrangements. The central, crucial and important business of organisations, he declares, is increasingly shifting from up and down to sideways. What is involved in such a shift is a virtual revolution in organisational structure and human relations. For people communicating sideways, i.e. to others at approximately the same level of organisation, behave differently, operate under very different pressures than those who must communicate up and down a hierarchy. To illustrate, let us look at a typical work setting in which a traditional bureaucratic hierarchy operates. While still a young man, I worked for a couple of years as a millwright's helper in a foundry. Here, in a great dark cavern of a building, thousands of men laboured to produce automobile castings. The scene was Dantesque. Smoke and soot smeared our faces. Black dirt covered the floors and filled the air. The pungent, choking smell of sulphur and burnt sand seared our nostrils. Overhead, a creaking conveyor carried red-hot castings and dripped hot sand on the men below. There were flashes of molten iron, the yellow flares of fires, and a lunatic cacophony of noises. Men shouting, chains rattling, pug mills hammering, compressed air shrieking. To a stranger, the scene appeared chaotic, but those inside knew that everything was carefully organised. Bureaucratic order prevailed. Men did the same job over and over again. Rules governed every situation, and each man knew exactly where he stood in a vertical hierarchy that reached from the lowest paid corps paster up to the unseen they who populated the executive suites in another building. In the immense shed where we worked, something was always going wrong. A bearing would burn out, a belt snap, or a gear break. Whenever this happened in a section, work would screech to a halt and frantic messages would begin to flow up and down the hierarchy. The worker nearest the breakdown would notify his foreman. He in turn would tell the production supervisor. The production supervisor would send word to the maintenance supervisor. The maintenance supervisor would dispatch a crew to repair the damage. Information in this system is passed by the worker upwards through the foreman to the production supervisor. The production supervisor carries it sideways to a man occupying a niche at approximately the same level in the hierarchy, the maintenance supervisor, who in turn passes it downwards to the millwrights, to the maintenance supervisor, who in turn passes it downwards to the millwrights, who actually get things going again. The information thus must move at a total of 4 steps up and down the vertical ladder, plus 1 step sideways, before repairs can begin. This system is premised on the unspoken assumption that the dirty, sweaty men down below cannot make sound decisions. Only those higher in the hierarchy are to be trusted with judgment or discretion. Officials at the top make the decisions, men at the bottom carry them out. One group represents the brains of the organisation, the other the hands. This typically bureaucratic arrangement is ideally suited to solving routine problems at a moderate pace. But when things speed up or the problems cease to be routine, chaos often breaks loose. It is easy to see why. First, the acceleration of the pace of life and especially the speed up of production brought about by automation means that every minute of downtime costs more in lost output than ever before. Delay is increasingly costly. Information must flow faster than ever before. At the same time, rapid change by increasing the number of novel, unexpected problems increases the amount of information needed. It takes more information to cope with a novel problem than one we have solved a dozen or 100 times before. It is this combined demand for more information at faster speeds that is now undermining the great vertical hierarchies so typical of bureaucracy. A radical speed-up could have been effected in the foundry described above simply by allowing the worker to report the breakdown directly to the maintenance supervisor or even to the maintenance crew, instead of passing the news along through his foreman and production supervisor. At least one and perhaps two steps could have been cut from the 4-step communication process in this way, a saving of from 25 to 50%. Significantly, the steps that might be eliminated are the up and down steps, the vertical ones. Today, such savings are feverishly sought by managers fighting to keep up with change. Shortcuts that bypass the hierarchy are increasingly employed in thousands of factories, offices, laboratories, even in the military. The cumulative result of such small changes is a massive shift from vertical to lateral communication systems. The intended result is speedier communication. This levelling process, however, represents a major blow to the once sacred bureaucratic hierarchy, and it punches a jagged hole in the brain and hand analogy. For as the vertical chain of command is increasingly bypassed, we find hands beginning to make decisions too. When the worker bypasses his foreman or supervisor and calls in a repair team, he makes a decision that in the past was reserved for the higher-ups. This silent but significant deterioration of hierarchy, now occurring in the executive suite as well as at the ground level of the factory floor, is intensified by the arrival on the scene of hordes of experts, specialists in vital fields, so narrow that often the men on top have difficulty understanding them. Increasingly, managers have to rely on the judgment of these experts. Solid-state physicists, computer programmers, systems designers, operation researchers, engineering specialists. Such men are assuming a new decision-making function. At one time they merely consulted with executives who reserved unto themselves the right to make managerial decisions. Today the managers are losing their monopoly on decision-making. More and more, says Professor Reed of McGill, the specialists do not fit neatly together into a chain of command system and cannot wait for their expert advice to be approved at a higher level. With no time for decisions to wend their leisurely way up and down the hierarchy, advisors stop merely advising and begin to make decisions themselves. Often they do this in direct consultation with the workers and ground-level technicians. As a result, says Frank Metzger, Director of Personnel Planning for International Telephone and Telegraph Corporation, you no longer have the strict allegiance to hierarchy. You may have 5 or 6 different levels of the hierarchy represented in one meeting. You try to forget about salary level and hierarchy and organise to get the job done. Such facts, according to Professor Reed, represent a staggering change in thinking, action and decision-making in organisations. Quite possibly, he declares, the only truly effective methods for preventing or coping with problems of coordination and communication in our changing technology will be found in new arrangements of people and tasks, in arrangements which simply sharply break with the bureaucratic tradition. It will be a long time before the last bureaucratic hierarchy is obliterated, for bureaucracies are well suited to tasks that require masses of moderately educated men to perform routine operations, and no doubt some such operations will continue to be performed by men in the future. Yet it is precisely such tasks that the computer and automated equipment do far better than men. It is clear that in super-industrial society many such tasks will be performed by great self-regulating systems of machines, doing away with the need for bureaucratic organisation. Far from fastening the grip of bureaucracy on civilization more tightly than before, automation leads to its overthrow. As machines take over routine tasks and the accelerative thrust increases the amount of novelty in the environment, more and more of the energy of society and its organisations must turn towards the solution of non-routine problems. This requires a degree of imagination and creativity that bureaucracy, with its man-in-a-slot organisation, its permanent structures and its hierarchies, is not well equipped to provide. Thus, it is not surprising to find that wherever organisations today are caught up in the stream of technological or social change, wherever research and development is important, wherever men must cope with first-time problems, the decline of bureaucratic forms is most pronounced. In these frontier organisations, a new system of human relationships is springing up. To live, organisations must cast off those bureaucratic practices that immobilise them, making them less sensitive and less rapidly responsive to change. The result, according to Joseph A. Raphael, Professor of Economics at Drexel Institute of Technology, is that we are moving towards a working society of technical co-equals, in which the one of demarcation between the leader and the led has become fuzzy. Super-industrial man, rather than occupying a permanent, cleanly defined slot and performing mindless routine tasks in response to orders from above, finds increasingly that he must assume decision-making responsibility, and must do so within a kaleidoscopically changing organisation structure built upon highly transient human relationships. Whatever else might be said, this is not the old familiar Weberian bureaucracy at which so many of our novelists and social critics are still belatedly hurling their rusty javelins.